Got it. Thanks, Todd. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending another Tech Talk Tuesday. This session is going to be on the basics of Nodegrid virtualization. So what we're going to go over today is a quick introduction to Nodegrid virtualization, some best practices and the requirements for enabling virtualization on a Nodegrid OS device. And then enabling it and installing images, some virtualization network considerations, and a quick overview of the topics. So the benefits of virtualization on a Nodegrid device. So to start, the Nodegrid device is not intended, it's not the intention to be a massive server. Right, it's not an HP DL360 or a comparable Dell product. What it's meant to be is a device to run edge native devices or edge native applications at the edge. So if that's a next generation firewall, edge native security applications, so a monitoring system for an IPS IDS, monitoring if it's like Cisco Thousand Eyes with checking for Wi-Fi SSIDs that are not in compliance. So that is the basis of what the virtualization within a Nodegrid OS can do. Based on like any other virtualization, the amount of memory, the amount of disk space, and the amount of RAM. So from there, we can also do zero-touch image deployment. So the device comes up, checks into the cloud or checks into a cluster manager. We can then push an image down to it and have that image auto start using some Ansible and some bash type scripts. And then there's a wide range of networking options, so we can pass through an Ethernet or a Wi-Fi card or cellular. We can bridge the connections to another Ethernet or another device, or we can have the native interface pushed directly through to the virtualized machine. And then we can also do network address translation, which is the default within the virtualization. A little bit on the requirements. So a ZPE container or a VM license is required for each virtual machine or Docker instance. A secondary hard disk, what this does is keeps the swap files and all of those things off of the main disk that's running the Nodegrid OS, and then the virtualization can run on its own separate disk. And then the memory available on the Nodegrid device needs to meet whatever the virtual image specifications are. In most cases, there are upgrades available for Nodegrid devices, both in hard drives and in memory. So we can address any of those issues. And then an ISO. So in my case, I'm going to be installing an Ubuntu ISO, which will be converted to a QEMU KVM image or a Docker image, and we'll go through what that looks like also. So without further ado, we'll jump into the demo. There we go. So let's get my window. Oh, why? Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so there is my my Nodegrid services. It's a gate SR. So the first thing we need to do is go to System, and then go to the licensing, and you can see that this device does not have any virtualization licenses. What will happen is, since this is associated to a to a Nodegrid manager, these will be leased from the device. If you don't have a Nodegrid manager, we can certainly add the license keys just like we normally would. So in this case, we'll go back and we'll look and ensure that we are licensed once we enable virtualization. So from there, what we'll do is we'll go to Security tab, and then we'll go to Services. And if we scroll down the page, not trying to get everybody all freaked out with license, there we go. So we'll enable Docker, and we'll enable KVM, QEMU. And one of the new features in Nodegrid OS version 6, which I'm running on this device, is that we can move the entire Docker directory to the secondary disk so that we don't have any conflicts or aren't constantly rewriting to the Nodegrid OS base operating system disk. We're writing to a separate disk. So from there, we will scroll back up and we'll select Save. And one thing before I do that, you notice that there is nothing called Applications here. So once I select Save, it'll take a second, and a new icon shows up that's called Applications. So from there, we can see that under Applications, we have Docker and virtual machines. And since I don't have any yet, it won't have leased any licenses. So let's go. And first thing we'll do is we'll set up a quick Docker image. So if we select new image and we type in, we'll do a quick Alpine, and then we have to hit enter. We'll just install this Alpine image. If you have a Docker repository within your infrastructure, within the Docker configuration file, you can change to your own repository. The other thing, once we get into doing this, by default, Docker issues IP addresses for Docker machines out of a /16. So that's a bunch of addresses, right? So what we can do is either change it to addresses that are on your local network, or we can change it to a smaller, say, /24, so 254 addresses, so that we aren't broadcasting an entire /16. So from there, we will select the Alpine, and then we'll download it. Just takes a second. And then from there, we can go in and set different functionality within the Docker container. You can expose specific Docker ports or container ports, mount other containers volumes. You can have you can change the environment variables, and the restart policy. I usually, if I'm going to run this as a server on my system, I usually have the restart policy unless stopped, so that if I stop it, then it's not going to restart. But otherwise, if it runs into an issue, the Docker container will restart. So we'll do that, and now you can see that that is already up and running. And as I pointed out earlier, we have a 10.40.0.2 on a /16 with a gateway of .1. And then if I hit enter a couple of times, you should see ls-al, we'll do that quick. And we can see that we are in the Docker container. So from there, let's back up and let's go back to system and reload. Currently, it has not grabbed licenses yet, so we'll go further into our demonstration. So now that we have a Docker container up and running, the next step is to move on and get a virtual machine up and running. So in this case, the first step is to create a storage pool. In this case, let's go back 1 second and ensure that we have a secondary disk. So ls list block -f will give us the hard disks that are included in the system. And you can see SDB1 is a 439 gig system or disk that's installed within the operating system. So now, once we know where that is located, we can call that function or that disk within our virtual machine. So from there, you can see that I have a virtual machines storage pool created. And then on top of that, we need to create storage volumes for the specific instances that we're going to run. In this case, I have one in Ubuntu already installed, and I will install a second one on this one that's called Ubuntu 1. So from there, we can go back to virtual machines, and you can see I have one that's up and running, and we'll go in and we'll create yet another one. So to get that up and running, let's make this Ubuntu 1. And then these are the options that we have for the installation type. So we can download an OS. Cloud-based image will pull an image from the ZPE cloud. Local install is what we'll be using. We can also go to a URL, or we can do a Pixie boot or a network boot if that's installed or set up in the environment. So in our case, we're going to do local media install, ISO or image, and the installation source has to be /var/lib library, and then /libvirt, and then we can go to images. And then once we go there, we can see a Ubuntu image that I downloaded earlier. So this is where the installation source has to come from, right? So this is where you store your images. But where the actual virtual machine runs, we can go into our virtual machines, and then we can go to Ubuntu 1, the one that we created earlier, and then we can give it a little more memory. In this case, you can see I have 31 gigs available. So I'm going to go, we'll just say 6. So now if we create and edit, there we go. So now it created that virtual machine. And now if we hit install up here, you'll see over in the console here in a second that it's going to start installing Ubuntu. So if I click in that window and hit enter, you're going to see it start the install. So what I'll do is I've already installed this Ubuntu server. Oh, of course, I clicked on the wrong one. This one. So I've already installed this one. It's complete. So we'll restart the virtual machine. Let's do that quick. There we go. So that's going to boot. So from there, we can go in, and now you can see that it's rebooting. It's going to come up. And now we have a full virtualized Ubuntu server. So now you can use that for whatever you might need to on your infrastructure. If this was a firewall, we can go into that specific virtual machine, and we'll go in here. And now we can go down and look at what disks are available, network interfaces. So as I was talking about earlier, we can go in to the network interface, and we can create a bridge to the virtual LAN or to the LAN. We can direct attach So what this will do is give us the ability to directly attach this virtual machine to any of the interfaces that are available on the Nodegrid services router. In my case, I'm going to do a virtual network. VirtIO, you can actually, depending on your virtual machine requirements, you can change if it's a E1000, which is the industry standard. So then we can do that, and then we can either set the MAC address or generate it automatically, and then we can always attach this. Since I already have it up and running, I'm not going to continue that. Host devices, this gives us the ability to plug USB devices or have other devices that are hosted on the Nodegrid device available for this virtual machine as basically a straight pass-through, or it gives us the usability of the devices that are plugged into the Nodegrid services router to this specific virtual machine. One place where this was useful is we did a proof of concept with Thousand Eyes, and we plugged in 3 separate wireless network adapters on that were on 3 separate SSIDs, so that we could understand what Thousand Eye or what was available for IPS, IDS in the SSIDs within that organization. So this is how we can either pass through USB or PCI devices. So these are devices that are found within the Nodegrid services router. And then USB are things, of course, that are plugged in. Snapshots, we can take snapshots of virtual machines. The one thing to watch with this is it will take up extra disk space. So if you're limited on disk space, this would be one place that we could do different backups. And if you want more information on how to do other backups within the virtualized environment, reach out to me or your SE, and we can certainly help you out with that. So you can see in this case, I am up and running. I have the internet address of 192.168.122.43, which is the default. And now you can see that I have a login. And you can see I'm in. So sudo. And then we can just do a list just to show that there it is. So I'm in my basic root directory, or in my admin directory. So from there, that is a quick overview of virtualization within the Nodegrid services router. I realize it was a quick demonstration, but it gives you the overview of the basic steps that are needed to get a virtual machine up and running. So again, we need a storage pool. For some reason that one failed, but we won't go there. So we need a storage pool with a storage volume for the specific device, or we can automatically create it. And then we just need to have the ISO image, or the image that you're going to use, located in the libvirt, the var libvirt images folder. So from there, Todd, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Marc. So we had a couple questions that came in. If you don't mind, we'll kind of run through.
No, not at all.
So the first question is there a way to create a link between the images directory and a secondary drive?
Yes. So that is by far the easiest way to do the images drive. So what we can do is go into FS tab and create a mount point that is called, in whatever case, var local mount is what I name this. And then we can have a secondary mount point on that same disk where it mounts to the images folder, so that if you upload something into this disk, it will also show up. It won't physically be there, but it'll show up as a symlink to that image. So now you don't have to load stuff onto the Nodegrid OS disk. You can load it onto your secondary disk. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. And I think you might have answered the second question, but let me ask it just in case. Why is it a best practice to have the virtual infrastructure on a separate disk?
So yeah, as I pointed out earlier, it comes down to that we don't want to run the virtualization because of disk read-write, disk whatever is going on within the virtualization. We don't want that information to be taking the space or degrading. Every write on a disk degrades the disk to a certain degree. It's not, it's just the way it is. It's millions and millions of writes, but it's best for the cost of a secondary hard disk. It's best practice just to put a secondary hard disk in. Then the entire virtual machine environment can run on that separate disk, and the Nodegrid OS can run on its own disk and be specified for just that.
Gotcha. Perfect. And then we have one last question. Can virtualization be scripted, thinking like zero touch deployment?
Yep. So that can be done either by the ZPE cloud. So we can even host images and have the ZPE cloud push the image down to the proper folder and then start a specific device. We've done this in several use cases for customers. We can also do it with a Ansible script where we can go out and get the image on the Nodegrid device. So if you're not part of the ZPE cloud, or if you don't have Nodegrid Manager installed, we can still do an automatic install of a virtual machine and service chaining and dedicating ports or Ethernet, whatever virtualization ports we need onto that specific virtualized environment. So yes.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I think that's all of the questions. So thanks, Marc, and thanks everybody for joining today's Tech Talk Tuesday. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing these on the second Tuesday of each month with a new topic. The next demo will be on March 12th, and Marc will be discussing the new features of our Nodegrid 6.0 release that was just released in the last couple of weeks. And for all of those of you who attended today, you will receive an email with details for your $25 Amazon gift card sometime probably this afternoon. So thanks, everybody. We're going to give you a couple more minutes back into your day, and we'll talk soon. See you next month. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.